Welcome to episode 3 of POLITalks TAMUSA, the podcast of the political science program at Texas A&M University in San Antonio. My name is Eugen Nagy. I'm a lecturer in the political science program in the Department of Criminology and Political Science. In this podcast, as I have said before, we are trying to talk about politics, political science, life in the academia, and in order to do that, I have various guests, both from within the university and the department and from outside the university. So, for example, the previous episode, we had a wonderful conversation on First Amendment pluralism and the right to association. The episode prior to that, we had as guest one of my colleagues, Dan Bratton, who talked about his recent book. And in this episode, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Emily Naasz, who is a colleague of mine in this department, but I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Thank you for having me on the podcast, Eugen. So I am Dr. Emily Naasz. I'm a lecturer here at A&M San Antonio. Been here, gosh, it'll be 5 years this fall. Primarily teach classes in international relations and methods. But excited to be able to talk a little bit more about my research agenda, the kinds of things that I've been studying, and kind of how I got here to A&M San Antonio. Excellent.
Well, let's start with the most obvious. You have a strange name. Explain yourself.
I do. So it's German. My relatives came from Germany. I think my great-grandfather was actually born on the boat coming over here from Germany. So my grandparents, ethnically German, spoke German in the household, especially when they were trying to get around my dad, if they had stuff that they needed to talk about and they didn't want my dad to know, they talked in German.
Did you pick up any German growing up?
Just a little bit, just enough to embarrass myself.
Yes.
But not enough.
That's your father's side, and from your mother's side?
Yep, so kind of mixed bag. I think largely from Sweden, but generally just the Scandinavian Nordic countries.
Which would take us to guess, which would make us to guess that you're probably from one of those Midwestern states in the north.
That's a really good guess. So originally from South Dakota.
There you go.
So I've been here in Texas, gosh, probably 15 years. So I think that makes me an honorary Texan at this point. I think I've earned that card.
Okay.
But South Dakota will always be home.
Where did you grow up in South Dakota?
So in Sioux Falls.
Okay.
It's one of the larger cities in South Dakota, just right next to the South Dakota-Minnesota border.
Yeah. How was it? How was it to grow up there?
It was good. It was nice. Winters were pretty brutal, and didn't really fully appreciate just how brutal they were until I moved down here and noticed the difference in December. But it was a good place to be from.
So tell us more about, I don't know how many people are from South Dakota. Of course, there's a small population, relatively speaking, so it's a smaller state in terms of population, not size. But what is it to be how does it feel to be a South Dakotan? Is there a South Dakotan sort of identity that is distinct in a certain way? How would you characterize it?
It is actually a little bit distinct. And this is kind of a weird way to categorize or classify, but like in Sioux Falls, no one has fences. So it's much more of a communitarian society, I've noticed. It's just such a small little thing, but I think indicative, maybe suggestive of a larger political culture that is a little bit more communitarian-minded than, say, we are in Texas, right? So, I mean, like Texas, you've got your fence and you make sure it's as high as you can get to keep your neighbors out. But South Dakota, Sioux Falls especially, a little bit more communitarian, I think.
So, good fences make good neighbors. No fences make good neighbors. Obviously, there's different ways to get the good neighbors. So, and what is the relationship, again, because you are from South Dakota, you are a good person to ask that. What is your relationship with people from North Dakota? How do you look at them?
North Dakota is to South Dakota what Oklahoma is to Texas.
There you go.
We just don't talk about them.
Pretend not that they don't exist. Like
they're there, but
yes.
you know, we don't talk about them.
It's just the sort of
black sheep of the family.
It's a sort of the North Macedonia issue of of the United States. Yeah, is there Macedonia? Should it be called North Macedonia, and so on? And indeed, I noticed that you have you did your all your higher education in Texas, and basically stuck around. So is this by chance, or was it a decision? Because you did your BA, MA, PhD at Texas Tech, right, in Lubbock,
Yep.
And then also when you started teaching, you stayed in Texas. So was this a decision, or it just happened?
Kind of both. Happy accident, I guess. Got a chance to kind of move around Texas after I completed my PhD. So I did all my schooling at Texas Tech. Go Red Raiders. It's a really good university, and it was convenient at the time. Worked with some really good faculty there and wanted to continue studies with those faculty members at Tech. And Lubbock is Lubbock, if you've ever been to Lubbock.
I have.
But it's an affordable city, we'll say, to live in. And then just kind of circulated around Texas. Again, honorary Texan now, I've got the card. So Texas is a good place, I think, to stick around. So combination of opportunity and sure.
You felt comfortable here.
Yeah. I did some teaching in Dallas, and then kind of wound back up in San Antonio. So San Antonio is a really good city.
So let's again go another step back. When you applied for various, obviously, universities to do your BA, was Texas Tech one of your priorities, or you applied to several, as it usually happens, and this one fit your desires, or how did you end up there initially?
Yeah, kind of all of the above. So like I tell students, you have to, deciding where to do a bachelor's or a PhD is kind of a matrix of different decisions. You have to decide what kind of program you want to get involved in, what you want to do with your PhD. And then there's just, a basic comfort factor that you've got to consider. If the city you're doing your bachelor's or PhD in is just miserable and expensive, and you can't find a place to live, and there's nothing to do on the weekends, it's just not worth your time. PhD is a real commitment, so you've got to make sure that the time that you spend away from your studies is kind of a retreat, is not going to be another source of stress.
Hassle. Yeah.
So Lubbock was convenient.
Yes. Well, clearly, when you choose a PhD, you have to go with, you want to study with someone, and that's how you choose your PhDs. Usually, this is how it should be happening. But with the BAs, it's more probably about the place and the university. But that takes us to the other thing, how did you end up choosing political science? Because, again, part of what we're doing in this podcast is to try to introduce people to this weird and wonderful field of political science and the weirdos who do it. And it's a good, always interesting question of how does one discover the field? How does one fall in love with the field, perhaps? So how did that happen in your case?
I wish I could say it was some grand, inspired decision. I don't have an interesting story other than a teacher I had in high school.
But that's usually how it happens, yeah.
It is. It is kind of the gateway to political science. I took a human geography class with this teacher in high school, and it really sparked an interest in what the study of human beings could be like in relation to geographical spaces, and how people interact peacefully or not so peacefully. So that was kind of the first introduction to what political science could be. And then just kind of a strange coincidence, I took another class a few semesters later, and someone mentioned that they're going to college to study political science, and it was like, oh, that's the name for the thing that interests me. So it was kind of a series of coincidences, I guess, that kind of started me on the path to political science.
So when you went to college, you already knew what you wanted to get your major in?
More or less.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as anyone can know what they're doing.
But it's still not few students actually have a very clear inkling, or they have some leaning. And going even further back in your childhood, did you have like a constant interest in politics or something related to, okay, how human beings live together? Or was your family interested or involved in politics, or this broader understanding of, okay, human beings, as you said?
Yeah, I think there is, and I can actually, now that you mention it, kind of jogged loose a memory. But, as kids, we would always go to the library. We were big readers. I'm still a big reader. And I remember there was this book that we checked out continuously, DK Publishing. I don't think they're even around.
Yeah, I know.
anymore.
I know them. Yeah.
Okay, yep.
They're good, actually. They're great.
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic book, and I can still see it and need to probably snag a copy of that book. But each page, each section was pictures of kids from other countries in their native dress or, ceremonial dress that they would maybe wear for, special occasions. And then pictures of like the food and the dishes that they ate and kind of the games that they played and little snippets of the holidays that they studied. And that, I think, was kind of I guess, tracing back further than, than high school. I think that was maybe the first inclination that I had, that I wanted to study things beyond my own experience, my own boundaries.
Your own culture, your own society.
Yeah. So I think that DK Publishing book, I think, was the first indication that I wanted to study something beyond my own culture.
Yeah, well, and obviously human geography, right? Because that sent you around the globe, so to speak. Yeah. For I think that for me, partially, and for part of my generation, and in Europe, it was the National Geographic, because you would have these, issues dedicated to various, countries around the world, and it was a similar sort of a way to travel without traveling. When you couldn't travel necessarily so freely as today.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, now you can travel much more easily, so use it. So then you get to Lubbock, and then you discover political science. Probably you took some intro classes to political science. And how quickly did you discover that it was IR and, I guess, comparative politics that you wanted to specialize in?
It took a little bit of time. So one of my first, kind of, I guess, another interesting story, I guess, maybe, one of the first political science classes I took, just, the introductory to American government, I actually met my partner there in that class. We went to high school together, and I saw him, and, I always thought he was kind of an interesting, cool guy, and I sat down first day of class, and that was kind of all she wrote. But it was that first class that, again, kind of further emphasized or further solidified in my mind that I wanted to study political science. And I don't think it was probably until in my last couple of years in undergrad that international relations and comparative politics really stuck. Again, kind of referring back to those experiences, human geography and kids around the world and those kinds of things rattling around in my head that really solidified international relations and comparative politics.
Did you have some faculty there that really had an impact on you, or some courses you took there?
The basic comparative politics course, and then one of the last classes I took as an undergrad, I think, was transnational issues, and I think that was what really started me on the path to international relations in my PhD program.
But clearly you liked the faculty there because you continued with an MA there and a PhD there, and they liked you because they took you in, sort of a thing, right? And you found people with whom you could work, right?
Yes. Yep.
And right now, basically, what would you say are your main areas of research in terms of your research interests?
So broadly speaking, what I study is human security.
Okay.
So for, kind of breaking it down, kind of going down in levels of abstraction. So international relations is the big field. Then within international relations, there's a few different specialties or subfields. You can study international political economy, international organizations, institutions, or broadly speaking, war. So war is, again, broadly speaking, the research agenda that I took on in my PhD. And again, once you leave your PhD program and get a feel for what the literature means to you as a person, you start to shape your research agenda. And I realized war is what I'm interested in studying, but the human element, again, going back to that human geography element. We study, how war impacts the individual, right? So war is conducted, and the costs are borne by people. It's not just states writ large. It's not states as like a born collective that assumes the cost of war. It's the human element that I think is most important.
And especially the non-combatants, right? So that's
Absolutely.
Well, in fact, that's we always try in these conversations to touch upon some, actual politics, so to speak, right? And a good way to do that is to sort of invite people who have written or are writing some, maybe an article or a book on some actual political, subject. And you just submitted probably recently an article to, what's the name of the journal again? Armed Forces and Society.
Yes, correct.
And the title of the article is Armed Non-State Actor Perpetrated Civilian Victimization in Armed Conflict. A long title. Let's try to explain what you're trying to do in this article in more lay terms to whoever is watching or listening this episode. What is this article about, if you want to synthesize it?
Yeah, I'd love to. So again, for service of that human security element, so this article in particular, this manuscript takes a look at the civilian cost of conflict. So specifically looking at when armed non-state actors, or rebels writ large is what we would call them, when they intentionally and purposefully carry out a strategy of civilian targeting or abuse. I take the argument that civilian victimization doesn't happen by accident, but is instead carried out intentionally by rational actors. That's the framework that I operate from. That's the starting point for the project, is that these are rational actors who carry out victimization or civilian targeting as part of a grander military strategy. Understanding that there are costs or opportunity costs associated with the strategy of restraint or victimization. So actors, state and non-state, here focus on non-state actors, can choose a strategy of victimization, and they may get some benefits from that. It's distasteful, it's uncomfortable to think about, but in choosing to target civilians, it might further their military goals or strategies in a few different ways. So if it allows them to, not worry or concern themselves with preserving civilian life in service of grander military strategy, that's one way that it offers them a benefit. If it allows them to, again, proceed without caution, that's another way that it can be a benefit. But in doing so, they forego the benefits of restraint. And there are some benefits associated with restraint for both state and non-state actors. So, it's a mixed bag, but in some cases, foreign supporters, states who support non-state actors do tie restraints, or they do
play a role in this decision making.
Sure, right. So they tie support to the non-state actors' goals and intentions, right? So they can withdraw support if the non-state actor chooses to target civilians.
So, but before we go to the weighing of the rational decision making, which is the topic, basically how they take this decision rationally. What are the counter explanations that you had to deal with when you chose your explanation? Because you're proposing an explanation. Why do these non-state actors victimize civilians? Is it irrational? Is it because Because there's a lot of explanations. What are some alternative explanations proposed in the literature?
One of the most problematic ones I saw, and this is, my framework is in direct
opposition sort of a thing,
to that. But one of the prevailing arguments, and it's kind of fallen out of favor, but there's still enough threads in there that I think need to be quieted. But that armed non-state actors are just barbarians, that they just can't control themselves, and they take their anger and their retribution out on civilian populations. So that was kind of a thread throughout the literature, kind of perpetrated by reporting agencies, so like even Human Rights Watch, BBC, news agencies reporting from the fields during the wars of decolonization in the 90s and early 2000s. The way that they described and framed the actions of armed non-state actors really problematic. Again, just continued use of barbarians or barbaric actions. And I think, that's really problematic for a number of different reasons. And like I talk in my international relations course, by assuming that actors, whether they're non-state actors, state actors, what have you, by assuming that these are barbarians and we can't understand why they do the things that they do, we lose the ability, or we lose the theoretical leverage to explain why they do the things
and to affect it.
Exactly. If they're just barbarians, there's nothing.
There's nothing you can do. You can't deal with that. You just have to.
Exactly.
So in response to that, you're trying to obviously frame an explanation that is based on rational decision making, right? So what are the components of this rational decision making? What are the for and against, the benefits and the costs that they weigh when they take such decisions? In your analysis,
So this opportunity cost framework is the framework that I use, and it's just that exactly.
Let's explain opportunity cost. What would that mean in lay terms?
Opportunity cost would be the cost that you pay for choosing one strategy, one choice over another.
There you go.
So like I explained to my students, opportunity costs, you pay an opportunity cost in not coming to class, right? You pay an opportunity cost in coming to class, right? There is some cost that you pay to make a choice, and the most important part of the opportunity cost framework is considering the foregone cost, right? So if you come to class, what you're giving up is the opportunity to sleep in and watch Netflix. If you stay home and sleep in and watch Netflix, what you're foregoing, what you're giving up is the material and discussion and whatever in class that you get. So that's the framework that I use, opportunity cost. What must be given up in order to pursue one choice or one strategy over another? And it's that part that I think is the most interesting part, because again, like what is given up is what we can not manipulate, but as international society, we can affect. Right? That's where
change the cost.
Exactly. Right. To make it more costly for non-state actors to use a strategy of victimization.
What are some of these costs that they usually take? So, for example, if they choose victimization, if they choose to use violence, why do they do it? What is their rationale? What is their weighing of the cost and benefits?
So there's a few different benefits and costs, right? So like preserving civilian life is, it's a difficult task, right? So being aware of where civilian populations are and skirting civilian populations, trying to, even if you're not intentionally protecting civilian populations, just limiting your military operations to avoid civilian populations.
Minding their existence, so to speak.
It sounds like such a low bar, but it's
the impact is tremendous,
But it still is a cost that you have to consider. Is being mindful of civilian populations and not carrying out any military operations that would affect civilian population centers. That's a potential cost, right? That civilian groups or that non-state actors assume. And then again, like I mentioned, maybe one of the benefits is in not having to be mindful of where civilian populations are. You can just go all in. You don't have to necessarily be mindful or intentional with your military strategies and campaigns. There's another segment, a thread of the literature that looks at principal-agent problems. If you're not concerned about preserving civilian life, if that's part of your military strategy, it's not important to you. You don't necessarily have to take control or be mindful of your agents. So the principal-agent problem in international relations, and I think maybe economics or sociology is where we borrow that term from, but the principal agent problem looks at the gap between what the principal or the boss wants and what the agent does, or what the employee, for lack of a better term, is doing. So if as a rebel group, you don't have control of your agents because maybe you've relied on forceful recruiting or child soldiers. It's going to be much harder to keep them in line.
That which would be a cost.
Exactly.
So avoiding the civilians is one cost. Another cost is to keep the discipline, so to speak, within your troops, which is not always possible or has some significant cost. Yeah.
So there's definite cost to preserving civilian life. In instances where non-state actors perceive those costs to just be too high relative to the benefits that they would receive by preserving civilian life, you can expect to see greater levels of civilian targeting.
And so you did, you using quantitative methods, and we're going to talk about that. And you studied, what did you use as the data source? So what did you look at? What kind of events? What was the material you have studied and analyzed?
So UCDP, so it's the Uppsala Conflict Data Program, is kind of the Cadillac of data when it comes to armed conflict and the kinds of research, international security that I do. So they've got a number of different really good, like top tier Cadillac data sets. But what I primarily use is civilian targeting data. That's a yearly basis. So that's the unit of analysis. Is the actor year is the unit of analysis. So that's primarily the data that I use.
And you looked at this data, you worked with this hypothesis of cost-benefit analysis. What was your conclusion? What did you reach? Meaning, like, in terms of what is, from the theoretical analysis, what would be some policy conclusions that we could propose?
And this is, I think, the really interesting and maybe novel contribution of the manuscript of my project is that international institutions, and specifically I look at an institution called Geneva Call. So they work with armed non-state actors. They work directly with them. They've created a number of different social media posts, like even some interactive games for actors to get a better sense of what their roles and obligations under international humanitarian law
So they're trying to educate them into basically the rules of war, the laws of war.
Exactly. Like, here are your obligations to vis-a-vis civilian populations. So I have taken data, originally coded data set from Geneva Call, looking at the interactions with these armed non-state actors. That's one source of data. That's one hypothesis that I test. I also look at a number of different deeds of commitment that these armed non-state actors themselves commit to. So there's a number.
Why would they do that? Why would they sign such deeds?
Exactly. So there's a number of different actors who come out and say, make big statements. And it's written. Like, I've looked at the records of them coming out and saying, we vow to protect civilian life. We vow to not use child soldiers. We vow to not use sexual violence. We vow to not use landmines, all these different things. And we can get into the weeds there, but I think, it's just as interesting for a non-state actor to commit themselves to these kinds of obligations as it is a state. So the similar mechanisms and theories that work to constrain or tie states' hands vis-a-vis international humanitarian law, I think work for state actors. And if anything, it should be even more of a signal from.
But why? Can you? Let's because again, let's suppose that whoever the people listening or watching the podcast are not from the field. Let's explain further, why do states obey laws of war? And because this is, as you said, the interesting thing, that non-state actors would obey the same rules. Because those familiar with IR, yes, we know that states, especially since World War II, have entered this whole liberal framework of international relations, of international organizations and treaties and so on. The world is ordered, right? But it's interesting to see that non-state actors would do the same. So why do states enter into agree to such laws of war? And why, even further, why would non-state actors do that, in your opinion?
So the overlap, the Venn diagram, where there's maybe similarities between why non-state actors and state actors would choose to sign these treaties, and that's the true puzzle. That's the really interesting thing about international organizations and institutions, is states are giving up a piece of their sovereignty in order to sign these pledges. Sometimes states do so with no intention of following their obligations outlined in the treaty language, and derogate or defect just as quickly as they can. but they still sign on to these treaties with the understanding that they are sacrificing a piece of their sovereignty to do so. That's the really interesting puzzle in international relations, and there's a lot of different reasons why states might do that. They might be trying to send a signal to the international community. So I mean, norms matter, right? Surrealists would have you believe otherwise, but norms do matter. It's a way for states to signal their commitment, and it could be an empty promise. It could be, again, they have no intention of actually upholding these obligations and will derogate at the drop of a hat. Other times states do it to tie the hands of domestic constituencies, right? So I mean, like, that's the really interesting thing is sometimes we see autocratic states sign on to human rights treaties, and that's really a puzzle, right? Because autocratic states have a pretty nasty reputation for human rights. Sometimes it's, again, to tie the hands of future regimes, right? Because in doing so, again, you give up that sovereignty, but you kind of lock in that obligation to human rights sometime in the future. So yeah, on the state side, that's why states might do it. But it's even more interesting and puzzling on the non-state side, because non-state actors do not enjoy the same privilege or recognition that states do, right? So in international relations, our unit of analysis is primarily the state.
Yeah,
anything that's not the state.
For better or worse.
Yeah, anything that's not the state is the error term, right? In quantitative methodology, it's the error term. We don't necessarily consider it. So it's especially interesting and puzzling when non-state actors sign on to these treaty commitments, because they're not actual treaties.
Once again, non-state actors like rebel groups or you know, in a civil war, or one of the factions, any faction that uses violence under the sort of not at the level of the state. Yep. So it's interesting that they would sign on, because there are no expectations for non-state actors. I mean, obviously they do have. And they're not members of the UN. They're not members of anything.
So it's really interesting, and that's kind of the theoretical leverage that I get from looking at this data from Geneva Call and looking at the kinds of deeds of commitment and involuntary statements that these non-state actors make, because there's no, I mean, the bar is so low that there is no obligation for them to uphold any kind of protections for human rights, but they still do. So there's a few different mechanisms why that might be the case. So they might be trying to signal or communicate to the civilian population, because a lot of non-state actors have electoral ambitions post-conflict. A lot of rebel groups get integrated into the government or the state after a conflict and become political parties or become ruling members of the country. And that signal that they're sending is a way for them to lock in a constituency, to lock in support.
So this would be an issue of legitimacy, basically.
Exactly.
Which works both at state level and non-state level. Because why do states do this, even autocratic states? Because they're signaling to their population that we're kosher actors, we're normal, we're legal, we're whatever. And non-state actors, they want to become part of the political game, and again wants to see that they're legitimate actors that you can trust or entrust with power and so on.
Exactly. So I mean, it's signaling. That's the mechanism that these treaties do. So it's signaling to either domestic constituencies or international constituencies.
What would be an international constituency for a non-state actor?
So it might be trying to attract foreign supporters, because again, wars are expensive.
Or it can be the same ethnic group across the border or whatever, or mother country or whatever.
Exactly. So there's lots of different external or international constituencies that non-state actors might be trying to signal to. And try and gain that legitimacy. So it could be the international community as a whole. It could be to attract foreign supporters, and foreign supporters in the way of other states, or foreign supporters in the way of the diaspora communities.
Or maybe when they gain power, that they would be recognized as a legitimate government or something like that.
Exactly. So there's lots of different reasons why they would do that. And I mean, like in answer to your question before, I do find strong evidence that these kinds of institutions are at least associated with decreased levels of armed non-state actor perpetrated one-sided violence.
So in their judgment, there are costs to avoiding civilians, to maintaining discipline and so on. But there are also benefits on doing that, and some of the benefits are related to their constituency, so to speak, or future constituency, or desired constituency, internal and external, right? So they're in your analysis, they're weighing these two things, and basically what you're suggesting, I gather, is that there is a part of this that we can influence.
Exactly. So, I mean, if there's some way for the international community, and I say just international community writ large, because there's a lot of components and actors and bodies that comprise the international community, but organizations and institutions like Geneva Call, they can kind of insert themselves into that decision calculus and then disrupt it for the better. They can make the opportunity costs for abuse that much higher, or the opportunity costs for restraint that much less. So there's a way for international actors to, again, like influence the decision calculus. And I think that's the most interesting contribution. I think that's the most hopeful, optimistic.
So to synthesize, in your data, in your analysis, statistical analysis, you saw that those non-state actors who have more sort of investment in a local constituency and more relations with an external constituency are less likely to commit such victimization acts. That's kind of the outcome that you found?
Yeah, and I can talk about the modeling choices I use.
Foreign language.
But I mean, like I talked in my methods class, I mean, we can't say for sure that it is in fact causal. I can just say comfortably that there is an association with armed non-state actors who either create or sign these deeds of commitment, and or actors who engage with Geneva Call, this organization, and their associated levels of civilian victimization. And it's an inverse relationship, right? So contact with Geneva Call, engagement with Geneva Call, or signing a deed of commitment, on the whole, tends to be associated with decreased levels of civilian violence or victimization.
And Geneva Call is a non-profit organization?
International organization. I think they're based out of Switzerland.
It just came to mind when you were mentioning these that autocratic regimes would enter would sign such conventions. In the history of the end of communism, an important moment was the Helsinki Accords of the 1970s, which were human rights accords, and obviously the rhetoric of all the communist countries was that they were democracy in action, they were for the people, they were real democracy, and they were the ones that were truly for human rights. So they actually all signed to these, to the Helsinki Accords, but obviously, as you said, not with no intention of respecting them, because internally they were suppressing dissent and so on. But I know, because that's my field, is that the civil societies in Central and Eastern Europe use this legal, you enter these accords. Well, now we can ask you, why don't you respect these accords, which you pompously and very loudly have signed onto and proudly, but now we can hold you to account. And that they reached, Poland, the Czechoslovakia, they reached significant advances because they basically forced the government to live up to a commitment that they themselves entered without actually knowing that, okay, this is going to come back to haunt us. It was very interesting.
It's a good way to lock in that commitment when you can't be certain it's a long shadow of the future, right?
And the government had to respond because, again, formally they wanted to keep the legitimacy. I mean, we look at Russia today and their language, they still couching their actions in the language of international law. They're saying that what we do is legal or justified for reasons that we can explain in a sort of a legal language, right? Although we're breaking the most basic norms of the international relations and the UN Charter and so on. So, but they want to keep the formal, formal legality of their actions. They're really obsessed with that, by the way.
And that's that desire to uphold, even if you're not actually authentically upholding it, I think is evidence or sign that the norms work.
Oh, right? And the Soviet Union was a case in point of that. You read the Constitution, it was a wonderful Constitution. Of course, it had nothing to do with the reality of life in the Soviet Union. So you used quantitative methods, and you teach research methods, and you also presented at various math conferences. What's with this inclination towards mathematics? What's wrong? No, I mean, but when did you discover that you were good at it, or you like it, and why do you think this is helpful in political science?
And that's actually the kind of funny story is I have never been a math person my whole life. That dichotomy when you're growing up, like you're a math person or you're a language person.
Yeah, letters, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I was always told, I was such a bookworm. I love to read. I was told, like you're a language person. And I said, yes, sir. I guess I'm a language person.
I guess that's who I am, yeah.
And then when I got to grad school, there was a heavy emphasis on quantitative training and teaching. And it was at that point.
At Lubbock. At Texas Tech, yeah.
My PhD program. Is at that point it was a sink or swim moment for me. So I better get on board with this quantitative stuff, or I'm gonna sink. Yeah. And the PhD program is such an investment and such a commitment that that was the choice before me. So I didn't want to sink. Yeah. So I opted to swim, and I discovered that I actually like it because math it's a different kind of language.
Yes,
that's the really exciting thing that I discovered is it has grammar rules and structures and functions just like the written word language has. So that was kind of the spark for me, was that realization that math is just language by different means.
Yeah, expressing reality through a different codified language. Yeah, just like physics, chemistry, whatever. Yeah.
And it's a universal language. That's also kind of the really interesting thing. It's a universal language. It doesn't matter if you speak French or Russian or whatever. Math is kind of a universal language. So that was kind of the philosophical roots of my interest. And then I kept taking additional quantitative classes as my PhD program progressed, maximum likelihood estimation and time series and game theory. And each course I realized this is interesting. I like this. And it just kind of started to build from there. And that's kind of how I approach my research methods classes is I understand math is not for everyone. Again, I'm not a math person. I guess maybe I am now. Honorary math person, like an honorary Texan. But that's how I approach my methods courses. You don't necessarily have to be a math person, but it's, here's some spinach, you're going to try the spinach. You don't have to like the spinach, but you're going to try it. Here's
an opportunity to learn a different language to which you can express reality.
Exactly.
And obviously, within political science, within every subfield like IR, there's so many approaches and schools and methods and quantitative and qualitative. So by the way, you don't have to do the quantitative, or you can, depending on what you want. Would you put yourself in one of these schools of thought? Would you consider yourself a rational choice theory person, or how would you, if you could, or if you want, can you characterize your approach in IR? So what would be your approach?
Yeah, so again, that rational choice, rational actor assumption. And there's drawbacks, and we talk about that in my
limitations
class. Bounded rationality. So understand that, but again, I think kind of going back to the original discussion on the utility of that rational actor assumption when looking at non-state actors' actions vis-a-vis civilians. It's a useful way, it's a useful tool. That's all these are. They're useful tools, ways for us to understand and model human behavior. That's all these are. And quantitative versus qualitative, it's there's strengths and drawbacks to each. It's just the way that we try to define reality, because we're studying. Humans are messy. Humans are messy creatures. It's not always easy to model or explain or predict human behavior. Quantitative and qualitative methods just try and capture reality.
Aspects thereof.
As best we can. Or aspects of. As best we can.
Well, what I do usually is encourage the students to be to not become prisoners of methodology, whatever it is, because they all have something to offer. Because becoming a prisoner of methodology also means that you reject the other one because, well, no, all of them have limitations. And in as much as they can provide some useful information, why not? Why would you reject any sort of useful information? So, an ongoing theme in what you're talking about, obviously you're studying real events, real actors, real things. have you, I know you once worked on a campaign, if I'm not mistaken, but have you, do you have plans of becoming more involved with the policy aspect, or making this transition, or sort of moving a little bit in that sense, in the sense of actually influencing policymaking in whatever way? Of course, we do that by these studies. So, I mean, theory is not theory in the sense of it's this abstract thing. It will have an influence and effect, for sure. But I'm saying in a more sort of a pragmatic way.
So, I mean, that's the beauty of what we do is we can inform policy actors. We can help to influence policy. What I've noticed is a distinct disconnect between the two fields, right? So us in our ivory tower in academia, not always able to effectively communicate real pragmatic
That's my question.
answers, you know, I mean, like material to policymakers. And on the flip side, policymakers aren't always eager to accept the recommendations and prescriptions from
because of the gap.
tower.
And
I don't mean like that. That's kind of a question I've been wrestling with since I left my PhD program. How do we bridge that gap? And I don't have an answer. I don't know if there's any practical way that we can make the ivory tower and the real world, for lack of better terms, communicate better with each other. I think there's great merit to both schools talking to each other, but I think the disconnect is just sometimes too wide.
Yeah, well, but here's, I think that there's a lot of space for creativity, right? So you just mentioned, for example, Geneva Call, you're studying their work, you're actually informing their work through these studies, right? So a lot of, you know, if it's not through state, you know, state actors, there's nonprofits, there's a variety of ways. I have, you know, friends who are involved in international peacemaking work while also being academics in the field. Because it just happens in their lifetime that they move from one to the other. In fact, my own background was first policy and then came to the academia, so I'm trying to still straddle that, but it's hard, of course, because it's a full-time engagement. Either of them are full-time engagements. But I think there's a lot of space and for creativity here, you know, and. So what was your experience, by the way, speaking of when you worked on that campaign? What kind of campaign was it? In Las Cruces, what was it?
Oh gosh, I mean, so that was like ages ago.
It's your trajectory. So that's the topic of the conversation.
So it was, gosh, I think shortly after I completed my PhD, or while I was finishing my PhD. Time is just kind of melded since COVID, so I forget my own personal timeline. But what I primarily worked on was kind of policy advisor, just kind of helping the campaign.
What was this for the House, Senate, or
it was
state?
The House campaign.
Okay, House campaign.
So I think it was New Mexico's 2nd congressional district. So it was actually a friend from high school.
Oh, there you go.
He was running for office in the district surrounding Las Cruces. I think it was New Mexico's 2nd district. And it was a positive experience. Again, I enjoyed actually applying some of what I was.
There you go. So that's what I'm talking about.
No, I mean, like, it's if we can bridge the gap, I mean, trust me, that's where the real synergy happens. But it's difficult sometimes to get.
Sometimes it's happenstance as well. Like you need to stumble upon. You know, I did a year of study on Central and Eastern Europe, and I was studying political science for the master's degree, and this was in Europe. And right after that, I got a job in developing international programs focused on politics in Central and Eastern Europe. So it was such a, it wasn't planned because I didn't know that I would get that job, but it was like so apropos. Literally, I just graduated from those programs. I got the job where I could design my own programs to apply what I just learned. It was like how lucky can I get? But I think that you also need to be open to such opportunities.
Absolutely.
And so what is, you know, I always encourage, and I'm sure you do as well, we all do it, our students to join these campaigns. What's the best way to join a campaign? Just knock on their door and say, I'm here to volunteer, right? For cold pizza and stuff.
I think, I mean, it's like you said, and it's how I found my way, keeping an open ear. So just being aware of those opportunities. I wish I could say there's like some secret formula for success. I think it's just being aware of opportunities, expanding your network, and not necessarily networking, but getting to know people, expanding your circle of friends and colleagues, and people you know. That's, I think, again, I wish there was some secret recipe to success, but I think it's just being aware of opportunities and being prepared to take an opportunity, even if it's not at a convenient time. Because opportunities rarely are convenient. That's how you know it's a good opportunity. If it's highly inconvenient at the time, it's probably a good opportunity.
You need to hop on the bus. I mentioned to our students that our department always gets requests from people running for office that they need volunteers, and I encourage them to stop by. We can put you in touch with such opportunities, but you need to make that step do it in an election year. that's when they need you, right? And I always tell them, Rumsfeld and Cheney. Which one was it? Cheney was an intern, or Rumsfeld was an intern of Cheney's in the House, or vice versa. Like it was literally a student intern. This is how they started their career. So that's how it happens. So you're offering courses in methods. You're offering courses obviously in IR, and obviously courses in American government and so on. And we will also start our department a minor, right, in peace and conflict studies, in which you are heavily involved. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I'm really excited to play a role in shaping what that program looks like. Again, it's a fledgling program, so we're still trying to sketch out what the parameters
look like. A growing one, yes.
Exactly, it's growing. So coming soon, this fall you can start taking classes.
In a classroom next to you.
And in peace and conflict studies. I think we're still trying to figure out what that's going to look like. Hopefully down the road we can maybe incorporate a study abroad element. I think that would be really beneficial for our students to, again, see what the world looks like beyond their own borders. And I think tying it into the concepts that we talk about in the peace and conflict studies courses, I think is a really good way to reiterate and really underline the real world applicability of what we talk about in the classroom.
Which also makes this field of study attractive, that I'm not just doing it for my own sake, although you should love what you're doing, but there's some applicability to it. And actually there's a long list of courses that already are planned to be offered. We just need to sort of decide when to offer them and what's the whole process and so on. So it's coming soon to a classroom near you. In terms of teaching courses, of course, there's courses that you have to teach as being part of the bread and butter of the subject, IR. Are there some ideal courses that you would like to teach, like some courses that maybe you don't get to teach them right now, but that you would like to teach sometime along the way?
So I can put those courses into two buckets. There's the realistic, bread and butter. These are actually contributions, and then kind of fantasy courses, we'll say. So in the real bucket, we'll say, so human security, I think, writ large, is a course that I would really like to teach.
What would that cover?
So again, the literature so far has been focused in war, has really been focused on the state and the cost that the state pays. But again, the human security element brings in the human cost of war, and
like
how
civilian
war,
cost,
exactly, how war impacts civilian populations, civilian infrastructure.
Society writ large.
Exactly, right? So looking at war from a more individualized unit of analysis instead of like a broad state-focused unit of analysis, really opening up that black box and taking a look at how war impacts individuals within a state.
The actual human cost.
Exactly, the human cost of war, and what it takes to make humans secure, right? Because at the end of the day, we're not securing land for the sake of land. We're not securing borders for the sake of borders. It's the human that needs to be secured. And human security can come in a wide range of different forms. It can look like keeping civilian populations safe. It can look like providing humanitarian aid to civilian populations. Healthcare, it's one of my other published pieces, looks at the health aspect of conflict. And there's a pretty well documented, pretty well-known finding within the literature that war is really hazardous to your health. Even if you survive a war, the statistics that we have really demonstrate that health outcomes deteriorate rapidly after a conflict. And it makes
All
sense.
aspects of health, both physical, mental, everything.
Exactly,
yes.
right? I mean, like maternal mortality statistics increase. People just are not able to get the health care that they need. War also, I mean, like leads to chronic illnesses, chronic,
pollution and so on.
you know, chronic injuries that manifest themselves later on, mental health aspects. So war is really hazardous to your health. That's kind of the underlying assumption. In the general like international security and war framework does not always consider that human security element, the human beings who are impacted by the tanks and the bullets. So the human security course, I think, is a really important
and interesting,
a really important partner to the general war course. Right? So it's not again not just about tanks and bullets and drones. It's
There's a
about
danger of falling into these sort of abstractions, but this brings it back to the ground, lived level of what does it mean.
Exactly. So the serious answer is a human security course. The non-serious answer would
let's not say not serious, the ambitious, desirable, whatever.
Oh, just wait until you hear what this course is. So I think the non-serious course, I think that'd be fun to offer would be like an actual fantasy and international relations course. So I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. That's my confession. And in reading like, you know, Lord of the Rings and the Game of Thrones books, you know, there's so many different elements that we talk about in our comparative politics courses. Exactly, American politics courses. So that would be the fantasy course. Would be fantasy and politics.
You know, in the previous episode, my guest was actually offered a course on Hunger Games, and it was about the politics of Hunger Games and how it's basically a post-revolutionary society that results in an autocratic regime and how that works. So, I mean, you know, thankfully there's flexibility in the academia. Of course, you need to fit and find the time and the place and the students to take it, but I mean, the possibility is there, and that's one of the positives. But that takes us to another aspect that, faculty are also human beings, so I hear. So they have more interest beyond their classroom. Again, it's a rumor, but let's see if it's true. In this case, because you said you're an avid reader, so your taste goes towards sci-fi and fantasy. That would be your major field.
My major field is
and this goes back to your childhood?
So grew up in a sci-fi household, you know, Star Wars, Star Trek.
You had spaceships in your household? Robots?
Just short of
robots?
I think if my sisters and I had our way, we would have.
Yes.
But short of spaceships, we went to all the Star Wars movies. I mean, the prequels that we don't talk about, we went to.
But now we do, because they seem much better in retrospect.
Oh boy.
Yes.
We were a big sci-fi household. I had a Scottish Terrier growing up, and if you know anything about Scottish Terriers, they've got pointed ears. So his name was Spock. After the Star Trek character.
There you go. And he was very wise and rational.
Something like that, yeah.
I see. What is, do you have like a favorite author, a favorite book, besides the ones you mentioned? Because sci-fi obviously is not just a wide field, but the authors are international, so...
Gosh, I can't choose a favorite book or favorite author. I can say like what I've seen within the science fiction, fantasy subgenre in the last couple of years is an increasing number of female and women authors writing in science fiction and fantasy. You know, I mean, like up until a few decades ago, it was the purview of men, right? I mean, like J.R.R. Tolkien is kind of the grandfather of sci-fi.
Sci-fi fantasy.
So it's been really interesting to see such dynamic female writers really stake their claim in the genre.
So you basically keep abreast of the developments in the publishing in the field, How about graphic novels? Do you read those as well?
Just a few. So Alan Moore, Watchmen.
Watchmen,
The only graphic novel I've read. But it's probably next on my list.
It's a different genre. It's a different, with a different language. So if you were to use some books like one book to teach a class in politics or international relations, which one would that be? In fantasy or sci-fi?
I think, Fellowship of the Ring.
Okay.
It's a small enough. We could even do the trilogy. We'll say the.
Not the Silmarillion?
No, that's. I've tried the Silmarillion.
Because that's the history of international relations.
No, I've tried the Silmarillion. It's still on my nightstand table because it's a beast of a book.
It's history, basically. yeah.
But I think Lord of the
Mythology,
Rings has enough concepts that we actually talk about. And I joke and say that this is a fantasy course, but reality dictates stories, right? So, J.R.R. Tolkien himself fought in, I think, World War I.
Yeah.
And the horrors that he saw from the battlefield really translated into his experiences, into the experiences of the characters that he created. So again,
and he was writing a history for the English people, for the British people. He was trying to create a mythology for them that was not sort of laughable. It was grounded because he thought we lost our history, our mythology, so we need to have our own myths. He was creating a grounding myth that was based on human experience. This is why we respond so positively. So yeah, it's all there.
yeah. There's so many different elements that we talk about in our courses in fantasy. Again, like the experiences of war, right? So war impacting human beings on an individual basis. Yeah, absolutely. And then comparative political economy of Minas Tirith, right? So where does Minas Tirith get its goods from? So we joke.
And the Hobbits' little community and their sort of agricultural society.
Exactly. So we joke, but there's a lot of elements.
Oh no, it is. Yeah. I think there's it's not a fantasy course. I think it's a real fantasy course. And how about Dune? Did you read Dune or did you watch it? And that also has this whole political dimension.
Gosh, so Dune, I think I read in the middle of COVID, amongst other stacks and stacks of books during COVID. But it's really exciting to see Dune on the big screen now, and a new generation of fantasy lovers getting a chance to see Dune and understand Dune in an accessible format. The book is really good, 10 out of 10 would recommend. But I think seeing it on the big screen is even more accessible for audiences.
And it had very positive reception, the new film version. So besides reading, which can take up your whole life, of course, are there other extracurricular activities that you could share with us? Do you have a dog right now?
I've got 2 cats.
Oh, there you go.
So 2 cats who kind of run my life.
Named?
Coco and Atticus.
Okay, Atticus, nice.
They're pretty good cats. So I've got 2 cats. When I'm not reading or teaching, really enjoy running.
Okay.
Not very good, but I do enjoy running. Recently joined the Greater San Antonio Quilt Guild, so I enjoy sewing.
Awesome. That's very Midwestern, though.
Attribute that to my Midwestern roots.
Yeah.
Again, you can't.
A tribute.
You can't leave it behind entirely.
Yes, you can't take the South Dakota out of the person.
So it's a nod to the Midwestern roots, I'm sure.
Yeah. And so running, do you plan to run a marathon or something? Are you preparing for such things? Or do you like to run long distances or short distances?
Mostly, a little bit of everything. But, marathons, maybe a little bit in the future.
No team sports? For you?
Sports, no.
Do you follow sports?
I got into academia, so I have to be on a team.
Do you follow sports?
No, not as much as I
just the Olympics, and they run.
Occasionally, yes. It's convenient.
You're in Texas. You said it was part choice, part happenstance, part opportunity. It comes, you have to hop on the bus. But you're a young, basically academic. You're at the beginning. Let's be generous, and you are at the beginning of your career. And I think it's pretty worth sort of asking, what is your broad picture for your career? Like, if someone wants to pursue a career in political science in the academia, it's interesting to hear from someone in the academia who is at the beginning, like, how do I picture my career? What do I want to do? Like, what is your broad picture for your career? Of course, things will happen that we don't know and can't plan, but if there is like a broad sort of long-term picture, how would you depict it for your career?
I wish I could say that I had a grand strategy and that every choice I've ever made has been part of a bigger strategy.
It's never going to be exactly that way. Yeah,
it seems like, I mean, I've kind of, loosely had a trajectory. I knew I've always wanted to be a professor. That's why I went and got my PhD. The title along the way was kind of a nice, consolation prize, but at the end of the day, I knew I wanted to teach and do research.
So let me stop you there, because that's very interesting. You always wanted to be a professor. Which part attracted you most? The fact that you would teach people, you would work with young people, or the research part, or both equally?
So, I mean, growing up, as a big reader, like when I found out that professors get to read and
get to read, yes.
It was like,
and are paid for.
This is a way that I could get paid to just sit around and read all day. This sounds like a pretty good gig.
Yes.
But that's really what attracted me, was that foundation, and then the understanding that I can, for instance, I mean, the math part, right? I mean, again, not growing up as a math person. Being able to communicate how I found math to other people who were not math people really was the spark that interested me, because I've been there. I know what it's like to sit at the dining room table at 9 p.m. trying to finish your math homework while dad is pacing. I know what that's like. I know what that experience is like, and being able to communicate with others how I found my way out of that murky doldrum space was really what sparked me. Was the spark that inspired me to go on to become a professor.
And the pleasure of seeing that same spark being ignited in the students is the motivation and the reward sort of behind what we do. Indeed, I was, to see this flicker of, I love this, I just discovered a new language, a new thing, a new world. Yeah.
Maybe the spinach isn't as nasty as I thought it was going to be.
It's not. I have some great recipes for spinach, by the way.
To hit you up for those recipes.
So it's not just straight from the can like Popeye. But back to this, broadly speaking, as I said, of course, you will follow your passion and it will form itself naturally. But how should an academic picture their career? Like, what is their, I just want to do my best as an academic, publish as much as I can, discover new things, teach as many students, or is there something else that you have sort of as a picture?
I think, it's up to everyone to find their own individual path. I think what I see for myself, and starting in fall, I will be starting as an assistant professor. That was kind of my goal.
I was getting there, but yeah, great that you.
I'll drop it in there.
Excellent.
So I think, that's kind of been a big goal, but I think in pursuit of that, in service of that, being able to just even stretch the literature, push the bounds of what we know about human security. Just even by, an inch, I think is what everyone in academia tries to do. You get to a point where you realize everything's been written, there's no room for me to make a contribution. And then you realize, well, maybe I can make just a small little contribution. Maybe I can push the field forward just a little bit. So you might not make big, wide, sweeping paradigm shifts or changes, but just the ability to provide some new insight or knowledge, right? That's what we do. Yeah. It's the pursuit of knowledge. We create knowledge. Yeah. It's not just regurgitating knowledge, it's generating new knowledge and understanding about how conflict processes work, or why non-state actors do the things that they do. It's pushing knowledge that much further ahead, so that someone else can then take up that mantle, take up that torch, and push the field just a little bit more. So each generation, of academics push the field further with what we know.
Do you recall, when was the moment when you realized that you're part of this broader conversation, that you're not just a learner, that you become a producer of knowledge, then in fact that you're one of the many, and together in this conversation we're advancing knowledge? Is there a moment when you realize this?
You realize that pretty quickly, I think, in your PhD studies, and that's what I try and emphasize with my research design students.
When you take ownership of your research.
And again, it's not just, or it moves beyond just regurgitating information and holding on to that knowledge. You're generating new knowledge, right? So new things.
New territories are being discovered, yes.
New things that we didn't know about why conflict actors behave the way that they do. So that's, I think, the PhD program is transformational in a lot of different aspects and ways. And I think one of the ways it is changing your mindset. Again, not just consuming knowledge and hanging on to it, and just soaking it up for the sake of knowledge, but then disseminating that knowledge, creating new knowledge. That's such a revolutionary thing to be able to do, is create knowledge.
Well, I encourage students to discover this as early as possible, because I think that the transition from high school to college is the moment when you enter into a space where you can become, you know, the actual producer of knowledge, and you can actually take ownership of your participation in this process. And obviously this happens, as I said, when you have the institutional framework to create your own research, meaning to present at a conference, to present at a symposium, to do a poster presentation, write a paper that is truly your own. And that's when you discover that, wait a minute, I'm actually figuring things out, and I'm learning from others, but they also have figured things out at their own in their own time. I'm just equally a participant, and it is a transformation. But in many ways, I think it's the most important transformation that a student can go through. This is why I ask when, in my experience, you know, honors programs are very successful in creating such frameworks. But this is why I encourage students to, you know, write papers, present at symposiums, because this is when you really become one of us. You know, one of the people who generate knowledge. Even if you're called a student, a PhD student is still a student, and yet they're generating knowledge. So, and this is, you know, this is when you take ownership of knowing, and also you sort of mature into someone who participates in this with equal rights with everyone else. And yeah, it's very important. This is why I asked when. I think that we have covered planets, spaceships, dogs, running, international relations, so plenty of things. There's still a lot to talk about, of course, but I want to thank you for participating in this conversation. I think everybody learned a lot, and this is the goal here, to learn a lot, not just about political science or politics, which is important, and we have learned a lot about that, but also about a career in political science and so on, and to discover that this is a field that you could do with passion and with love, and it's very rewarding. And that you can only discover it, you know, by, you know, taking political science classes, and by, you know, meeting and talking with people who do that as a profession. So thank you very much for being a guest on this episode. Our next episode will be published after the summer. We're taking a break for the summer. We're only publishing episodes during the semester. So the next episode will come out in September 1st. And we will continue this process of talking with people both from within the department and from outside the department for the same purposes of touching on some interesting issues about, for example, you know, international conflict, but also getting to know the faculty and the political scientists both from this institution and from other institutions. My name is Eugen Nagy, and stay tuned for future episodes. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Emily.
Thank you.